Hi everyone! Today we're diving into the legal side of the modeling industry. From tricky contracts to delayed payments, there is a lot that often goes unnoticed until it becomes a real problem. To help us understand how to protect ourselves and navigate all the fine print, I am joined by an expert, Caitlin Puccio, the attorney who specializes in representing creatives, freelancers, and yes, models too. Hi, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you work with people in the modeling and entertainment industries.
Yes. Well, I actually started myself in those industries as talent. So I started as a model and an actress before moving into the legal side of things. So what I do now is mainly focus on contracts. What I try to do is catch problems before they become problems, which is why I'm on the contracting side of things instead of the litigation, argumentative side of things. I try to fix problems and prevent them before they actually happen. What I try to do as an aside, as a sort of a complement to that, is educate models, first of all, on why they need to actually read their contracts. And understand a little bit about how what's written in the contract is not necessarily always how things happen in practice in the industry.
Amazing. So I guess let's start with something you probably hear a lot. What kind of cases do you see most often from models reaching out to you?
The most common thing I hear is that either a model is generally unhappy with an agent and wants to get out of the contract, or an agent hasn't paid and the model doesn't understand why they're not getting a response. Now, the way to deal with this, it kind of depends on what's written in the contract, but there are a few different ways to deal with this. But the important thing to note here is that usually when these models come to me, they haven't read their contract. So they signed a contract that they didn't understand, they didn't see, and now they're coming to me and saying, okay, well, I have this problem. And this is exactly why it's important to read those contracts, talk it over with someone before you sign them so that it's easier to handle on the back end.
I totally see that. So I think this is a very sensitive topic. And let's say here's a situation many models find themselves in. Their agency hasn't paid them and the payment deadline has already passed. What should they do in that case? Are they entitled to any overtime or late fees?
So what they're entitled to will depend on what it says in the contract. Generally, no. And what usually happens, first, you always want to just talk to your agent.
Right.
It may seem like there's this big problem. It might not actually be a big problem, but you have to be comfortable enough talking with your agent and saying, look, I did this job 6 months ago, I haven't gotten paid, what's going on? You don't need to come at it from an angry perspective or impatient perspective or anything like that. It's just a question, it's a conversation. Sometimes the problem is not the agent and it's that the client hasn't paid yet. And usually what it says in the contract is that the payment is due to the model however many days after the client pays the agency. So you might say, oh, okay, 90 days has passed, but I still haven't gotten paid. Well,
Right.
The agency hasn't gotten paid yet, so the clock really hasn't started ticking yet.
That's true. So everyone should keep track of the timing, right? To make sure
Yes.
the terms are fulfilled. Awesome. So the next question for you would be, when I'm about to sign a new modeling contract, can I have a lawyer review it beforehand? Is that common practice at all?
You absolutely can and should have a lawyer look it over. Is it common practice? The common practice is that models will just sign the contract without a lawyer looking it over.
True.
Sometimes what happens is the agent will call the model in, they'll hand them the contract and hand them a pen and say, here, we're happy to have you sign now. And the model just signs. That's not what you want to do. You want to have time to look over the contract. You do absolutely want to have a lawyer look it over as well, even if you get really good vibes from the agency. Even if you don't want to change anything about the contract, you should talk it over with a lawyer just to make sure that you understand exactly what's going on, not only, again, what's written in the contract, but how it's going to affect your work in reality. Because again, it's not always just what's written in the contract, but it's how it functions in the modeling industry that's important to understand.
That's a very valuable tip. Sometimes Contracts includes clauses that feel really unfair. For example, if the model is held responsible for a client's failure to pay the agency, is that even legal?
Okay, so in contracts, unfortunately, there's a difference between unfair and illegal. Of course, we know this. There's a lot of unfair contracts that are perfectly legal, right? When terms are illegal, it's more clear to lawyers. That's a little bit easier to handle. Unfair terms are a little bit different. And this is, again, why you want to have the contract reviewed in advance, because it may be perfectly legal, but it may be very oppressive. So, for example, if the model is on the hook for a client not paying, that means, and you'll see this a lot of times in modeling contracts, the contract will say, if a client doesn't pay, it's the model's responsibility to give back the money that the agency has spent chasing down the client. So if they hire a lawyer to get the client to pay, or if they go through debt collection, or whatever it is, any expenditure will be the responsibility of the model to then repay. That, I would say, it may not be illegal, but you could see it as unfair. That's a term that you want to really take notice of. But that's not something that we could say, oh, we need to strike this because it's illegal.
That's like a gray zone, right?
Yeah, it's a very precarious way. Negotiating modeling contracts in particular it's a different beast because you know how quickly agents can walk away from the table.
Now let's talk about something more sensitive. A client making a model feel uncomfortable. What rights does the model have in that situation?
This is going to depend on the situation. If a client made you uncomfortable because he or she said something and it sounded, inappropriate to you, it sounded creepy, that might be looked at a little bit differently than if you were actually physically violated in an inappropriate way by this client. So, it depends on the situation. But the thing to always remember is that you as a model on set are responsible for yourself, for protecting yourself. Your manager likely will not be on set with you. Really, no one will who's going to protect you like you will. So if something does happen, call your agent or your manager or your lawyer, call someone, explain the situation. If you are not sure if it's something that you should be worried about, you get a little bit of a bad feeling, but you're not sure, talk it over with someone. If something actually happens to you on a set that you know is wrong, you leave the set. Then you call your agent or lawyer immediately and you say, okay, this is what happened. You can also keep a log just yourself so that you remember exactly what happened. And if it's something that you want to pursue legal remedy for, then of course contact your lawyer immediately and say, all right, this is the situation. What do we do? Thing does happen like that and you are verbally assaulted, you feel threatened, whatever it is, you leave, because that's the first way to protect yourself, and then you see what you do.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And for anyone listening who might be dealing with a difficult or unfair situation, what's the best way to reach out to you for help?
I am very available by email, Caitlin@pucciolawpllc.com. You can follow me on Instagram. I don't usually reply to direct messages as quickly as I do emails because I'm always on my emails. So I would say just you can send me a quick note. I will respond. We'll chit chat about it. We can set up a call, whatever it is. But I'm very open and very available.
I think the next question many models who are listening to us right now would have, I know a lot of models worry about the legal fees. Do you offer consultations or flexible payment options to make getting legal advice more accessible?
Yes, I'm very flexible with payment. I know, especially before models start working and start earning money, that it's very difficult. Again, I was a model, I was there, I understand it. The thing to remember here is that you do need to look at it as an investment. Just as you would if your agent says to you, you need to do a photo shoot, you need to upgrade update your portfolio, you would invest in that. As a contracts lawyer, it is usually a one-time contract review. So it's kind of a fee up front, right? And then you're done. If you don't have that contract reviewed and then you're in trouble later, it could be a lot more expensive down the line if you're trying to go back and fix something. But what I do is I work with the model's individual circumstance. If she says, I want this contract reviewed, plus I have 20 questions, and I also want to talk about this, I'll say, okay, well, here's the fee. And she says, you know what, I can really only afford half of that fee. Then I say, okay, what we'll do is we'll do the necessary contract review first. Then later, when you're comfortable, let's say a month down the road, you know, we'll talk about those questions that you had, or we'll work it out somehow. But you do need to also realize that this is a very important part of investing in yourself and protecting your career.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for all this incredibly helpful insight. I feel like every model, whether they're just starting out or already working with big brands, should hear this conversation. If you're watching and found this valuable, make sure to share it with a fellow model and drop any follow-up questions in the comments. And of course, check out the description below for all the ways to contact Caitlin Puccio if you ever need legal support. Thanks again for joining me, Caitlin.
Thank you.